Hey everybody, it's good to be here. I do want to say, if you watched last week, I felt like I was really confusing. Maybe I wasn't, I don't know. But it just felt confusing to me because my brain is just so full of stuff about Herod and Herod's dad and all the brothers and all the stuff that's going on. I hope I didn't confuse you. But we're in the middle of that story, and I'm going to finish it out. I hope to finish it out today, but it's in the 6th chapter of Mark, and we'll start in verse 21. I'll give a little background. Let me pray for us, and we'll get rolling. I don't really have anything to tell you. I want you to know I'm recording this a little bit earlier, because my wife and I are in northern Michigan, having a few days away, much needed. And so if from the time that I record this and a few days before you see it, something amazing happens, I don't know, Jesus comes back or, there could be all kinds of stuff that happened and I don't mention it tonight. And you're thinking, what's that about? Tim didn't mention what just happened. I don't know, Dave Rod wins the Irish sweepstakes. I don't know, something could happen. It's just because I'm recording this just a little bit early. So just so you know that, okay? So I'm probably in northern Michigan, I don't know, reading a book. Okay, so that's probably what I'm doing. Here we go. Anyway, let me pray for us and we'll get going. Lord, what a joy it is to continue to study this story. And I keep thinking, Father, about how you give us a story and then you take us back to your Son. And there's so many interesting connections between who your Son is as the true King of the Jews and who this man Herod that we're learning about is not as King of the Jews. And all of the other interesting connections, that this is all a part of the fact that you, as the ultimate author of these words to us, the one who looked over them and kept them for us, you have not only employed great writers, but you've made sure that this is all interesting and carefully put together for us. So thank you for that. Help me not to be confusing this evening, and Lord, make what we learn tonight something that helps us honor you more. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, last time we'd found out that Herod had John in prison because he didn't want him raising a rebellion, and he didn't want him talking anymore about him, saying you shouldn't be married to your brother's wife. And because he was married to his brother's wife, he stole her away. They had an affair, and then they ran off and got married. And then he also has got him in prison because he's protecting him from, of all people, his own wife who wants to kill him because she's just tired. I don't know that I read in the notes to you last night, but it said John's criticism fell on Herodias, and the last thing she wanted is to continually have John pointing out her failures. And so this is what's going on. So we got John the Baptist. He's in prison, right in the same building, right near where Herod is, and Herod's always dragging him out and having him talk, and every time he talks to him, Herod gets feeling bad, but he still likes to listen. It's all just wacky stuff. And anyway, in verse 21, it goes like this, and it's going to take this story's going to take a big shift here. He says, Herodias, this is the wife's chance. By the way, you remember George Foreman, how he named all his kids George and all of his daughters Georgina? This is kind of the same thing. They're all named after the dad, okay? So Herodias, whose dad is, guess who? Herod the Great. Finally came on, Herodias' chance finally came on Herod's birthday. He gave a party for his high government officials, army officers, and leading citizens of Galilee. Then his daughter, again, also named Herodias. We don't know that. I'll talk about that in a minute. Came in and performed a dance that greatly pleased Herod and his guests. Ask me for anything you like, the king said to the girl, and I will give it to you. He even vowed, I will give you whatever you ask, up to half my kingdom. She went out and asked her mother, what should I ask for? Her mother told her, ask for the head of John the Baptist. So the girl hurried back to the king and told him, I want the head of John the Baptist right now, on a tray. But then the king deeply regretted what he had said. Because of the vows he had made in front of his guests, he couldn't refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner to the prison to cut off John's head and bring it to him. The soldier beheaded John in the prison, brought his head on a tray, gave it to the girl, who took it to her mother. When John the Baptist's disciples heard what had happened, they came to get his body and buried it in a tomb. Okay, we already know that this is a sad end to this story, but when it takes a turn in verse 21, the Greek says, and coming a suitable day. Now, the language itself lends itself to Herodias' desire to kill John. The suitability of this day is that the circumstances suddenly turn in her favor. We have no way to know that she'd planned this out at all. Like just the thought, and we're going to talk more about this in a minute, but to send her daughter out to dance in front of Herod, thinking that if she does it in such a way that it moves him, that he's going to offer her whatever she wants. This is kind of far-fetched. The idea that a mom would let her daughter, and by the way, this girl's probably 12. We'll talk about that in a minute. But to let her go dance in front of a bunch of drunk old men in the first place is kind of creepy. But again, remember, these families are creepy to begin with. I think that it's a suitable day, not because it was his birthday, but because what happened on his birthday made it suitable for her to get her way. So I think she's not that. If she knew that her daughter could go dance in such a way in front of her husband to make him want to give her anything that she wanted, then there's a lot deeper problems going on than, anyway, we'll talk more about that later. But anyway, it's Herod's birthday. And I think I mentioned the last time that Jews did not celebrate birthdays. He was having a great celebration for his birthday, and Jews did not celebrate birthdays in the first century. They didn't even think about it. That Roman and Greek people, mostly Romans, they did celebrate birthdays. And Herod, being a Greco-Roman ruler, he wanted to be known as sophisticated. He threw himself a big dinner party. He threw himself a big dinner party. I'm always taken aback by people who throw themselves big birthday parties, but what do I know? What do I know? Anyway, this is what he does, and interestingly, the word for birthday that's used in the text here is Geneosous. That's hard to say. Genesousis. There are three vowels in a row there. And that particular word that's used here is normally the way that Greek people talk about the celebration of the birthday of a person who's already died. The word that the Greeks normally use to celebrate a birthday it's Genesia Emera, the day of the beginning. That's what it means. The other word is a word that means a marking of beginnings. So this is weird. Mark uses the word to describe his birthday party as the kind of thing you do when you celebrate somebody who's died. Now, there's a reason in this, and that's because Mark makes sure that we all know, by that word being there, that anytime anybody thinks about Herod's birthday, they also think about the fact that Herod's birthday is the day that John the Baptist died. His birthday is actually the marking of the death of someone. And so he uses the word to say birthday that marks the celebration of the death of someone. The birthday of the death of someone who has died. It's just too cool. You know, you have to know the Greek to see that, but it's way cool that he's marking in the text that this is not a celebratory day, he's not even going to call it his birthday. He's going to call it by something that hints at the birthday of somebody who's what? Dead? And let's just say whatever happens here marks Herod as his life is essentially over after this one. I just thought I'd throw that in there. The evening supper had come, Herod is surrounded by some really important people of Galilee. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of picture. Okay, here's the Sea of Galilee. Here's the Jordan River. I got to get my... This is the east side. This is the west side. Herod rules Galilee up here, and Perea, which runs over here. There's Samaria, then Judah. John the Baptist preaches down here in Judah. Herod's palace in Perea that we've talked about is over here. It's just across the Jordan River in Perea. So he could easily cross the river, get John, and bring him back to this foreign land. This Perea was all Gentile. So all of these Galilean men who have come to this party have had to travel a good distance to get there, and they're clearly all people who can take time off, hang out, party as long as they want. These are important, high-level people. These are not just anybody's. These are important people, and it says that the people that were there attending, the words are, it's the megasterion, which means that these are the courtiers. They're the big landowners, the highly placed landowners who would have a spot at Herod's court hanging out. You know how whenever you see a painting of a king's court, there's like the king on his throne and maybe the queen next to him and then some servants, and then there are all these people hanging around. Well, these were courtiers. They were there. And then there's an interesting word. The word is chiliarchos. And this is technically, it's technically the commander of 1,000 men in the Roman army. And yet we think that in this case that this word was used just to mention that they're highly ranking military officials in the Roman army. And so now let's think about that a minute. So what he's done is he's brought a bunch of his courtesans or courtiers, rich landowners. He's brought people from the Roman army who are big shots who rule over, they run the military, which is really the fact that the Roman military is even present at all makes sure that Herod can keep his job. And then the third group, it says, I love this, it's the protois tes Galileas, which means the chief men of Galilee. Now, this would be leading politicians, well-established, known folk from Galilee. And so what we've got here at Herod's place is really an august gathering. These are the big shots. And he'd called them all to come hang out with him at his palace, celebrate his own birthday. And can I just say, just the idea of a big festive dinner like this to celebrate Herod's birthday would have rankled most Jews. You don't celebrate yourself like that. You don't have a big party to say, I'm so special because I was born on this day. They didn't even do that at all, let alone drag a whole bunch of their friends over and have a big dinner and make everybody get all worked up so we can celebrate his birthday. Now, the text simply says, the daughter of Herodias entered and danced. That's all it said. Now, she is unnamed here. I need to look at... Yes, okay. I don't know where the NLT said the daughter also named Herodias, because the Greek says the daughter of Herodias herself. Now, some people put commas in there and they go, the daughter Herodias herself. I don't think that's right. She's not named at all in this text. And the way that she's referred to later when it says the girl, it's a girl of 12, now marrying age. So we're talking about a little girl. Josephus names her and calls her Salome. Have you ever heard about the veiled dance of Salome and that kind of stuff that's in stories and movies and stuff like that? This is Salome. if there's ever a movie about this and they actually have a 12-year-old girl, the movie gets really creepy. Let me just say, you never see that. Whenever they picture this, it's always some grown 20-some-year-old girl dancing, but it's not. This is a little girl. And it says that now remember, this little girl is the daughter of Herod's brother. Okay? He's her uncle. Right? And it says her dancing pleased, and it goes first Herod, and then it says, and those reclining with him. You know, people reclined when they ate in the big banquet halls. The tables were set at level. They went from the floor up, and they were flat. The tables were really low, and you sat on one side, you leaned on your left hand, and you reached out like this, your feet were back, and you ate like this, and they called that reclining. People reclined at big dinners. So when it says reclining, that means that they were special enough to get a space at one of these places. In fact, I don't want to go into this now, but the ordering of where you reclined was the social pecking order. And they called those the setups like that tricliniums because they usually had 3 levels. But so they're all reclining. Now let's just think. They're done eating. This is when entertainment takes place. They'd been drinking. You know they'd been drinking. They are warmed up to be entertained. Now, much is made of this girl's dancing. As I said, Josephus names her Salome, and I'm going to call her that occasionally. But the general notion is this, that her dance was erotic and that excited Herod and the crowd. That's where most people come down, okay? That this was that kind of a dance. It doesn't say that. A lot of scholars are now saying that they feel that because when it calls her a girl later, it's like a young girl, just marrying age, which is what, 11, 12? And they say she was just a girl, and her dancing was just like a free-spirited little girl just dancing around the room. And that there was nothing sexual about it at all, but they just thought it was just fun. And so everybody was happy that this little girl, but we don't have any way to know. We don't have any way to know, but it just doesn't seem like just a little girl jumping around a room is going to elicit from Herod to give away half his kingdom. Anyway, and again, this is not part of a plan, but we do know this. Herodias is always looking for a way to get rid of John. And Herod, in this moment, he plays right into his wife's trap. Herod, in his excitement and probably his drunkenness, whatever, says, he makes a stupid offer to the little girl. He said, ask whatever you wish for, and I will give it to you. And then he adds this quote. It's a quote from the book of Esther, where Xerxes says to Esther, I will give you up to half my kingdom. Now, my thought is that he's thinking he's a big shot like old Xerxes, who was the king of all Persia, and he's got all these guys around him, and this little girl's danced, and everybody's excited about it, and he's going to be a big shot and go and say something hyperbolic, which is a quote from a biblical book. I'll offer you up to half my kingdom. Now, one thing we got to keep in mind is that there is no way that he could have given half his kingdom to anybody. He couldn't have given 1/1000th of his kingdom to anybody, because the Romans gave him the spaces that he could rule over, and he could not give that property, any of that land, to anybody else to rule over it. In fact, the Romans were always making sure that they weren't going to take it away from him. And so him offering this little girl up to half his kingdom is stupid. He served at the Romans' pleasure. But again, he's probably a little bit drunk, and he's being a big shot. And he makes what? An oath. And an oath in their world was a big deal. Oaths were not empty promises. Herod, by making this offer, had bound himself to keeping his word. But there was no way at all that he could have foreseen what was about to come. None. He's just making noise to look like he's big, a big man. But somebody was waiting in the wings with a plan, and verse 24 says, and going out. And going out, it says of this little girl, which fits, with the archaeological finds that she had to go from where the men were eating to where the women were in the smaller dining hall. And she asks her mother straight up, what should I ask for? What should I ask for? And we have no idea whether she was wise to her mother's plans. We don't know. We don't know whether she knew that her mother held a grudge. Oh, you can almost bet on it, though, that she did. We do know, and here's an interesting thing, that this little girl had been taken away from her father, and she'd been forced to live with her uncle, who had had an affair with her mother. And we can surmise that her attitude towards the things that were happening to her because of what was going on between this man, Herod, and her mother was something that she was not necessarily very happy about. And when the mother says, ask for the head of John the Baptist, that's all she says, the head of John the Baptist. You see, Herodias knew her chance had come. She directs her daughter to ask for what she'd longed for, which was John's head. And the next words are very telling. They're very telling. We get a clear picture of this little girl's underlying attitude in the words. It says, it goes, and entering immediately with haste to the king. You remember that word immediately? Euthos, that is showing up over and over in the book of Mark, which is used throughout to push the narrative along quickly. Well, what it is here is it's a picture of Salome's willingness. Immediately, she runs back into where the men are. And she is so willing to do her mother's dark bidding. And Mark doubles down on the immediately, saying, not only did she go immediately, but she went with haste. He adds that in there. It's like she is running in to get the word to her stepfather, uncle. And she adds, I want it right now. Right now. You don't have time to think about it. And she's excited to push Herod. She says, right now I want it. And she has a change to the actual request by her mother. Her mother just said, I want John the Baptist's head. Salome says, I want his head right now on a platter. Now the word there is, it's pinaki or pinaki. It means the tray that you serve the menu items at a dinner. In other words, there's a dark irony in this, that this little girl wants to see John the Baptist's head brought in a manner that makes it look like it's something we're going to all eat for dinner tonight. It's like, I'm going to show you. You've been protecting this guy from my mom, who has every reason in the world to want to be rid of him. And we're going to bring it in so it looks like you're going to serve it as dinner to your guests. Now, there is dark. This is a 12-year-old girl. I don't know if she has that much ire in her, but you know what? I got to say that she might have good reason to be so in line with her mother's desires to kill John. And it was clear that John was a favorite of Herod's. And we can't be 100% sure about this, but there could very well be, if this dance of hers got him worked up in any kind of sexual way at all, it would have been lust on Herod's part towards this little girl. And my bet is that it wasn't the first time she'd experienced inappropriate interests from Herod in her. I'm just saying. She too may have had a good reason to see Herod lose a person that he respected and was protecting from her mother. Now, this is conjecture, but it all makes sense to me. It's also interesting that she eventually is married off to another half-brother. Antipas marries this girl off to one of his brothers. So he marries her off to her uncle. and her uncle's name is Philip, which is the same name as her dad. So I'm just saying it's all weird. Now, this request catches Herod off guard. The Greek says he was deeply grieved. Deeply grieved. That's a really important thing to see here, because the word is paralupos. We only find that word one other time in the book of Mark, and it's when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, realizing he's about to go to death on the cross. And it says, as he prayed, he became deeply grieved. This is a sign of deep, deep emotion. By the way, Herod is referred to all through this passage as the king. This again is Mark's irony. He's not the king. He never was the king. But he keeps referring to him as the king. He is very unkingly in this moment, and he's far more concerned about his reputation than doing the right thing. The right thing would be to say, forget that. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to kill an innocent man. Think of something else. But he couldn't. Why? Because he'd given Salome his oath, and oaths were so important in that day, he couldn't back off. You know that if you had to keep an oath if it was ridiculous and even evil, that you were expected to keep an oath. It was a badge of honor for a first century man to keep every oath. And this has been the case all through the Old Testament. You see it all through the Old Testament and into the New Testament. But he also had what? A room full of high-placed Galilean leaders and Roman soldiers. And these are the reasons he's grieved. Why? Because he has no choice. Why? Because he doesn't want to embarrass whom? Himself. At his own birthday party. This has nothing to do with anything other than his concern for his own reputation. He didn't want these guys to go home and spread through Galilee. Hey, you should have seen what happened to Herod at the Galilean party, or at the party that we had for his birthday over there in Perea. He has us all over there, and this little girl comes in and dances, and he makes her a big promise, and then he backs out. I mean, he's not even a man of his word. What kind of leader is this guy? Anyway, the Greek says, because of his oath and the ones reclining, he did not wish to reject her. Once again, we get the word immediately. It says immediately sending an executioner. I mean, the story just picks up. It's just like bang, bang. The word in the Latin for the executioner is an interesting word. We get the word speculator out of it. The word is speculatora. Let me say that again. Speculatora. I'm probably pronouncing that one wrong. It's a big, long word, but what it really meant was it was a military position in the Roman army. They were scouts who went out and found out what was going on. Originally, it denoted somebody who was really important in the legionary commander's headquarters. He was the guy who went out and did particular things to make sure that everything was safe for the head of the commander of the legion. And one of his jobs to make sure everything was safe for them was to cut people's head off if they needed their heads cut off. So the word became used both in Hebrew and Aramaic to speak of an executioner, because the only time that Jews and people who spoke Aramaic ever had anything to do with a guy like this, he was cutting somebody's head off. Okay, so he sends him, and it says Herod had one of those there with him. It says immediately he sent him, and it just goes boom. He orders bring the head. He says he just goes out and he says he sends him to bring the head to him. And it says, and going, he beheads him in prison and brings the head of John to the girl on a platter. It's all over really quickly. Boom, boom, boom. The text doesn't even say where the little girl was when she got John's head, but the assumption that she's there with Herod, we assume that Herod saw the head on the platter. We don't know, but it says that as soon as she got it, she took it straight to her mother. And Herodias has her desire. There's no indication that Herodias thought that sending her young daughter in to entertain a bunch of drunk men with her sensual dancing was going to lead to this. But she certainly took advantage of a weak moment on her husband's part. The idea of any mother encouraging a young daughter to sensually dance for a gathering of much older men, again, is creepy to start with. We have to remember that we are dealing with a highly incestuous, morally bankrupt family. Mark gives us no details of what happened at the party afterwards, no details of Herod's response other than his guilt-ridden response earlier when he saw Jesus and he goes, he's back. But he goes right directly to what Peter would have been concerned about, and that's John being buried. And it says, and hearing the disciples of him. That's how it starts. And hearing the disciples of him. I just have to say quickly in the last minutes here, we don't know where the disciples of John were. We don't know how long it took them to find out that he'd been killed. We don't know how long they had to travel to get there, whether they'd actually followed him or outside the prison. What we know is, though, that when they heard, they got up and they went and they did something really brave, really brave. They went to the prison where his body was, and they collected it, and they took it out, and they did what you do with the body in those days, and they buried it in a tomb, one of those places where you put a body to let it rot and get bones out of it a year later. They did the right thing. They did it. They performed the appropriate duties. And just so you know, John's ministry didn't end when he got his head chopped off. His fame spread broadly. We even see in the book of Acts, when Paul goes to Ephesus, there's a whole bunch of Jews in Ephesus, in Turkey, still following the teachings of John the Baptist, preparing their hearts for the coming of the Messiah. It all happens to him. It's all done to him, John. He's the primary character, really, of this whole story, but he never does anything. It's all done to him. And this is really important because what this story is a foreshadowing of what will soon happen to Jesus. John the Baptist was dogged by people who held a grudge against him because he was speaking the truth. And they wanted him killed. And so they induce a weak-willed Roman ruler to kill him. And that's exactly what happened to Jesus. He was dogged by people who had a grudge against him because he was speaking truth that made them uncomfortable. And so they they convinced a Roman official named Pilate to condemn Jesus to death so they didn't have to take the blame for it. But they got there. It's saying what? But, this is all the same thing. Mark is going to tell us the exact same story in another way later when he talks about Jesus. This is the way that it ends. They put him in a tomb. We're going to move on. The story shifts back to the apostles being out talking, speaking for Jesus and all that stuff. But this is a story that we need to know, because we need to know what? We need to know that the man who called himself the King of the Jews, or wanted to be called the King of the Jews, the only time he sends anybody to do anything, it's to drag him away from preaching the truth and to put a man to death. He falters at the moment when everything is on the line. And the real King of the Jews sends people out to tell people the truth and to give them life. And we get this story in the middle of Jesus sending out people to do what? Heal and cast out unclean spirits and to preach the good news of the kingdom of God. And we have the real King of the Jews doing everything exactly the opposite of what this other man in the middle wants him to do. Mark knew exactly what he was doing when he did this. This is powerful. When we come back next time, we'll be talking about the apostles. They're called the apostles, the sent ones at this point, the next verse. And we're going to see, not only are we going to see Jesus reaching his arms out to them and saying, what you've done is wonderful, but then we're going to see probably the greatest moment up in the story up till now, when they do what? They show that they really care about the people who live in this place. Jesus really does. He feeds the 5,000. So this is all really got great, cool connections. I hope this has been helpful. I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.